I really like who I am right now. I like this person that I've become because I am so vulnerable. It really started with my relationship with my husband several years ago because I was closed off. I shut everybody out. In my teenage years, I didn't let anybody in. I was so hurt for so long and so vulnerable with the people that continue to hurt me and hurt me, hurt me. I closed everybody off, everybody. And then I met my husband who had done the same thing. He had been hurt and hurt and hurt and hurt in his whole life, but he swore he would never put up those walls to not let somebody in. And it just blew my mind. He blew my mind having this approach to life that I'm still going to be me. I'm still going to be vulnerable. I'm still going to put myself out there. And I got a cute little story I was thinking about as we were talking about vulnerability. I met my husband. I knew him previously, but I was 18 and we were young and we went on our first date and then our second date and our third date 3 days in a row. And on our third date, I told him I loved him. It was an accident. I didn't mean to. He was hugging me and he had just been so raw and open and telling me his story and his life and about his past relationships and his family. And he was telling me all of these dynamics, being 100% vulnerable with me. And I had never experienced that in my life. Never felt that level of someone opening up to me. And he went to hug me and I just laid my head on him and I was like, I love you. And it just blurted out because vulnerability demands vulnerability.
Yes. Yes. And see, that's the thing. Like, he was wanting you to say it at that moment because he was thinking the same thing, but he was kind of seeing if you would go there with him. You showed him in that moment. It's a beautiful story, by the way. I still don't believe, and you're still together a decade plus later, still happily married and happy in every way. You got the 3 kids in the beautiful house, and it's just, yeah, your life's going really good. Most people probably told you at the time, you're crazy, you're too young, it was too fast, and all the things. But vulnerability begets vulnerability, and you kind of have to have that on every side, or this doesn't work. Like, somebody can be vulnerable, and you saw it with the family, that you were being vulnerable with them, but they weren't returning it. And so it made you put up walls, put up walls, put up walls, put up walls.
Yeah.
Thank God for Wild Man in your life, because
Yeah.
you still have all these walls high to the sky, and just get out of my way.
Yeah, yeah. He demanded that. Like his presence around me, just I craved that. And so that was really the shift of me words, beginning to become this version of me. And so I go by Brittany, that's what I go by in everyday life, but my Instagram handle is becoming Brittany Lee, and it's almost as like my name is Brittany Lee Davis, and becoming Brittany Lee is like this. I want to get there. Like Brittany Lee is like the healed and whole version of myself. And I don't know if I'll ever be there, but it's not a there I'm chasing. It's just becoming this version of myself, owning my story, showing up, being vulnerable here with the people listening, and vulnerable with my friends, and vulnerable in all of these relationships. And along this way, as I'm becoming more and more vulnerable and opening myself up, I'm becoming this version of myself that I want. I want people to know my story and hear my story, and I want them to feel that vulnerability that I give, so much so that they want to share their story. They want to pour out.
Well, that's the thing about vulnerability. It allows other people and gives them permission to be vulnerable
Yes.
back. Because when they see you've got walls down and you're like saying, and you and I have experienced this many times. I've shared things with you I don't share with everybody. And I'm like, okay, how's this going to go? Like, early on. Now I'm like, blah. And you're like, yeah, come on, bring it. And then you do it back to me. And it's so fun, because when you have somebody willing to go there, and who you know has your best interests in mind. But there's this trust, like with you and Wildman, the trust was quick. You knew, he knew. And it was pretty quick with us as friends, but it's rare. You don't find many people willing to open themselves up to the kind of relationship you and I have, for example. It's just, yeah, people don't want to go there. They want to hear you be weak,
Yeah.
and in
Yes.
that, perceived to be stronger than you. Well, look at the crap they're going through in their life. Look how wonderful my life is. Meanwhile, they're falling apart, but they're not willing to share in it. They only knew, had they shared, you could help each other and grow from both of you being vulnerable.
Yes. And as a person who embraces vulnerability, I see those types of people with big red flags. They have big red flags, and I just see big X's, and I don't mind being around them or in their life. But if they're, and people don't have to tell me their whole life story, okay? That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm begging. But there's this level of vulnerability and just being open to listen to me, to listen to my thoughts and my beliefs and my feelings, and just be opening to listen, even if they're not willing to believe or feel the same thing that I do. They're just open. And that's something that I aim very high for this. So if someone comes at me in a conversation and like, no, this is wrong, you're terrible, you're horrible, and this might be a real life situation that I'm speaking from, I get attacked, and I refuse to meet that attack. I refuse. I'm like, I'm open for a conversation. Let's have a conversation about this. Let's meet on a common ground. I would love to talk to you because I stay in this open, vulnerable place where I am just willing to learn. I am willing to look at your life, and if we disagree, I'm willing to look at why we disagree, what got us here, where your beliefs came from. I'm willing to look at all sides, not just my own. I'm willing to open myself up to so much more. And in that, my relationship has gone, every time you and I get into something, I'm 28, you're 48,
9.
49, somewhere around there, late 20s, late 40s, female, male, a lot of differences that we have. We're going to have different things come up. But every time we've had these come up, you set a boundary or I set a boundary. We are open and vulnerable when we set said boundary. We're not used to that. And each other, we meet there, we are open to that, and we respect that boundary. And then our relationship grows because we were vulnerable in this one moment of pain and hurt to grow.
What's amazing to me is how people can be friends or even have some kind of a relationship with anybody of any kind, whether it's love, whether it's family, coworker, whatever. How do you have a relationship that's more than weather, sports, politics, and nothing else? Like just this surface value stuff. You and I talk about how we both loathe that in relationships. I want to go deeper. You can't go deeper unless you start cutting, and you don't cut until you're vulnerable.
Oh man, it just makes me laugh when I get around people. My husband has a work friend who had come over to the house, and Mr. Enrique is his name. And Enrique was just listening to me talk to somebody else, and something piqued his interest. He was like, "What you doing over there?" And we brought him into the conversation, and like almost like jaw on the floor, just listening as I talked so openly and so vulnerable and so just putting it out on the table. And he's like, "How do you do that?" And I'm like, "I just do."
It scares people. They don't know how to handle when you're willing to go in
Yeah.
conversation anywhere, and within the boundaries of decency, of course. But like it's amazing. People think that there are certain things you're just not allowed to talk about, and I'm going, but why? Yes, there are a few things you should never talk about, but like most of the things of life, like talk about them. That's life. Like how do you process life if you're not going through this process of opening yourself up and being vulnerable, being willing to possibly be judged by what you're going to say? How do you go there?
Yeah, well, continuing on the story with Enrique, a couple days later, like after the hangover period, that's what I like to refer to, the hangover after somebody talks to me, where it's like sinking in, like, wow, she really said that. Like, she said that. Sorry, by the way, I assume that people listen to the podcast also have that hangover feeling. They're just like, wow, that was a lot to take in. Um, and a lot to process. Well, a couple days later, he reached out to my husband. He's like, "What does your wife do? What does she do? What is her job?" Because I'm a little confused. And my husband, and then he eventually asked, "Can I talk to her? I want to talk to her. I want more. I want more of that." And he's like, "I just want to respect, that's your wife." And my husband's like, "Be careful what you ask for. Be careful. because Brittany is 100% vulnerable. I will tell you everything that ever happened in my life. I have zero things to hide. I'll tell you my mistakes. I'll tell you where I've messed up and I've learned and I've grown. I have zero shame about the things that I've done in my life. I don't feel shameful for them because they were lessons. They were things that I can learn from. And if I do make a mistake and I do feel bad about something, I might shame myself for a minute. And then I'm like, you know what? Let me learn from this. Let me grow from this. And that's that process of becoming vulnerable. Start here. Start with yourself and start with being vulnerable with you versus other people. That's harder, trying to be vulnerable with another human being that not necessarily that you trust. If you don't trust yourself and you were taught this pattern of not trusting yourself, and you can't be vulnerable with you, then you're not going to be able to do that with anybody else. So start here and ask yourself those hard questions. We talk about them a lot here. Why do I believe this? Why am I here? Why do I feel like I can't grow? Why do I feel all of these things? Start asking those questions and going that one step deeper. Just be vulnerable with you.
What do you think the major hangup is? Is it that fear of hurt, or are there other things going on?
Yeah, patterns and things that have happened in our past that have taught us when we're born, we are vulnerable. We're the most vulnerable that we can ever be.
Yeah.
And when we're hurt at our most vulnerable time, things happen in our brain. It's why I parent the way that I do. I'm not perfect by any means, but I honor the sheer vulnerability that my children have right now at such a young, impressionable age. I do my best to not berate them or belittle them because whatever voice I speak to them becomes their inner voice. And so now we have hundreds of millions of hurt people bringing all of that, having more babies and pushing it on. And it's just this cycle over and over and over again because nobody's willing to be where you and I are and accept crap. I got some bad things. I need to take hold of this. It's my responsibility to take hold of this. I have to be vulnerable with myself, grow from this, and then pass on better habits to my kids and then to their kids and on and on and on. This generational curse that we have going on of everybody being anxious and depressed and upset, I believe it's breakable, but we have to be vulnerable to get through that.
I think you're on to something, like that hard wiring that happens when you have a learned behavior. For you, when you were trying to be vulnerable and the adults in your life that were supposed to be the responsible ones just let you down over and over and over. And
Yeah.
I learned, you don't be vulnerable. You're a wuss. You're a man up already. What are you, gay? Like, I had everything thrown at me from my abuser saying those kinds of things to me. And quite frankly, Brittany, it made me put up the walls, like happened with you before Wildman. And it took many more years for me to break down those kind of walls. And even still, I see them susceptible of coming back up. I'm like, I done tore you down once. I ain't going to tear you down again. Get away. And it's so hard to overcome that unless you're deliberate.
Yeah. Being vulnerable allows you to see other people's reactions as what they are. They come from a place of hurt.
Yes.
So I have a lot of family members in my life that have been hurt and refuse to acknowledge that they have childhood trauma or trauma from losing a relationship or trauma from a job turning them down. They refuse to acknowledge, oh, that's just life. That's just how it is. They refuse to acknowledge that there's hurt and there's pain there, and they pass that on and pass it on and push it off and push it off. And they refuse to be vulnerable with themselves and honor that they got some emotions about this. And because I'm so open with myself, it doesn't excuse their behavior.
Yeah.
Okay? There's a difference in excusing someone's behavior and understanding the reason why they are the way they are. Because I'm so vulnerable with myself and I've been this way and I've been open to learning, I can view the situation through their lens and see why they are where they are.
Yes.
And that helps me.
Well, and it's a compassionate, kind of response. But until you do that vulnerable work yourself, you don't see it, which is why they don't see the value of vulnerability. They see the value of their walls. As long as the walls are up, I'm protected. But when you bring those walls down and you feel the feels, as you like to say, and get through the hurt part. The other side of that is kind of like when we kind of transition to keto flu, and it's hurts those first couple of weeks.